This week on the BackTable podcast.
The idea of tying payments to these things that require a lot of kind of bureaucratic buy-in and extra cost to be in compliance with drives consolidation, and consolidation healthcare increases prices. We've seen it now with big healthcare networks, the hospitals, the payers. When things get big, they get more expensive. They're not getting more efficient with scale. They're just using that to extract value for themselves. And so we need to make it possible to be small again, to be agile, and to not to be part of some big thing. And that's, if I were in Doge, what I'd be focusing on is reducing all the friction to just practicing real healthcare by real humans for real humans, and not for these kind of nebulous, kind of awful, grinding bureaucracies that are just designed to extract money through friction.
I am your co-host today, Ali Baheti, along with my dear friend, Mike Barraza. And we are bringing back a super important guest that we had on, I think maybe over a year ago now, Dr. Ben White. He is a neuroradiologist at American Radiology Associates in Dallas, Texas. So for those of you who don't know Ben White, he is a thought leader in radiology, and he's done a lot for the radiology job market, as well as young radiologists coming out of training. He has a really popular blog. Is it benwhite.com? Is that what it is? Yeah.
That is correct.
Nice work. Yeah. And we're going to be talking today. The original title for this was like, what is going on with private equity? But I'm sure we'll get into quite a few other things, including kind of the future of private practice. And we got some audience questions for you too. Ben, thanks for being on the show.
Awesome. Good to be back.
So, okay, just touching on our last episode, we were just talking. It was super popular. It was really well received by our audience. So thanks for coming on for that. But a lot has changed since we last talked, I think. Can you give me a little bit of information about kind of what the job landscape has been over the past year and a half?
For sure. I think even a couple of years ago, a lot of people in the radiology market felt like we were in a COVID-related issue that was not really part of the overall thrust of history that we're all living a part of right now. And so people thought that, okay, we have some extra retiring, so a little bit of a shortage, but it's going to be transient. We're going to be okay. And I think the past year and a half has really just proven that that was not the case, that really we are kind of in a seismic, profound, probably permanent radiology job market change where we have a really profound shortage of radiologists right now. People are struggling to get the work done in a variety of ways. Recruiting is hard. Retention is hard. It's kind of a zero-sum game in some capacity. And so it's created a lot of tumult, I think would be the right word, for everybody practicing, whether you're in a hospital, academia, private practice. I think everyone is kind of feeling that pressure, and it's just getting more and more kind of dramatic, I would say, overall, over the past year and a half.
Yeah, it really feels like everybody is feeling it, which seems unique compared to the few other upheavals that I've seen in my short career.
When I was a trainee, I remember the job market was tight. So I finished in 2017 was residency, 2018 was fellowship. And when I first got into residency, I was 2013, people were like debating, do we need a second year of fellowship to get a job? That's what people were talking about back then, which is comical. Yeah. Now people were like, who needs a fellowship? And I remember people were having this discussion where like, if you got a job offer in your field of specialty, it was like a magical thing. You just took what you could get. And when that happens, when the job market's that tight, academia sounds great. You're like, the pay cut, the whatever, vacation is bad. Who cares? That's fantastic. I'm here for it. And now you get a situation where we have stipend support from hospitals. We have this explosion of teleradiology. And because there's this profound shortage, everyone's like, looking at the jobs out there. I'm like, is my job that great? Am I happy in my job right now? And it's just like the amount of like, there's so much upheaval, so much transience. There's much less people who are, I think, fixed to where they go. We've seen a really profound change, I think, in the kind of what happened in business, right? Back in the day, you had your pension, you used to work for one company your entire career. I feel like radiology felt like to me that was it probably never was that way, but in my mind it was.
Yeah.
It's definitely not the way anymore. Right now, people are really just moving around like crazy.
Yeah, it seems like there's like an attractive job posting like every week. And I'm like, oh man, that sounds better than what I'm doing. Should I jump? And now just because of all the systems that are in place because of COVID and teleradiology, it's a lot easier to make that transition too. And people are way more willing to work with you for that. Don't worry, Mike, I'm not leaving your group.
No, a habit that I started when I was in my first job, which was a group that had sold to private equity, is I started reading the ACR and SIR job boards. And at the beginning, it was to look for a job. Now I just read them for fun. I get the weekly email and go through them. I see the ones on, the Facebook page and Independent Radiology, and it's fascinating. I mean, there are some remarkable sounding jobs out there.
That's a key point, though, right? The sounding job.
Yeah.
Sounding. The summary of the job is phenomenal. The actual
Totally.
job itself, who's to say? But the sound is top notch.
The adjectives have gotten like way more intense like in the past couple years too. Just like they'll be like amazing job, like all this stuff. But yeah, you're right. A lot of them don't have like a lot of depth within the actual job posting, so you don't actually know what you're getting.
You can't catch the vibes.
No, you can't. And I think it's one of those funny things too, where we probably talked about this last time I was here, but because of some of these private equity companies that have been struggling, these groups that have been struggling, everyone who quit those practices didn't want to move their families, right? And it's because we were in a teleradiology world, no one did. Most of those people quit their jobs and joined the telemarket. And because those people would have been people who normally, historically, would have moved their families and uprooted them and moved somewhere else, but didn't, then every other job is like, well, now I got to compete for all these people who are in the workforce but aren't willing to move. And it's like this domino effect where the more people who want to do tele, for fair reasons or not, more people have to offer tele jobs. Now we're in this kind of nationwide tele competition for warm bodies to put some RVUs on the list, right?
Totally.
And the more desperate you are for work, the better your offer for tele is going to be. But then people who are not so desperate can't get people because they're not so desperate, and they can't justify the really great tele offer until they are desperate, and then they have to offer the tele. And it's like, oh my gosh, it's happening. It's happening every day.
It really is. It's dramatic how much has changed. I mean, I'm selfishly going to use myself as an example. When I moved, I took my job in Louisiana in probably 2020, right in the middle of COVID. And I moved from Nashville to Baton Rouge, and it was not something I wanted to do. I didn't want to move my family. Now, completely different options available to me if I were in that circumstance.
It's something else. And then like for me, for example, I live in a state where we have really low Medicare reimbursement. And so like the jobs in Washington do not pay well for the most part. And then, it's like I'm open to being able to do a tele job, for example, in Baton Rouge where they have fantastic reimbursement. So it's just like if you have your eyes open, like something will pop up that is good for you. You touched on a couple different things. Can you give me a summary of like what's happened with the private equity groups like over the past year or two?
So, the groups themselves, I think is one issue, and then the overlying kind of company, the umbrella company, is a different issue. And so for the groups, RP remains by far the biggest of these entities. And, most of the places they bought were a 5-year vesting window. So the partners who sold the practice, who got the buyout, signed up for 5 years of continued workage until they were allowed to essentially quit without any kind of claw back to their equity or any kind of potential issues with being forced to keep working, because that was part of their contract. And so those windows all started kind of hitting in the past year. And so we've had several groups that have hit that window, and let's say downsize would be the correct word, I think. So people have left those practices, which, again, people are leaving practices everywhere, right? It's not like it's unique to RP or to private equity, but certainly at one time, there have been a lot of people who have quit many of these practices. Typically, what I've seen is that in the kind of year leading up to that 5-year window, all the fresh partners, the people who are partners in name only, who, were not partners when they sold, but became, a quote unquote partner. But again, they're not partners because they don't actually own anything, but they got paid more. Those people all quit in advance, knowing that the legacy partners were going to quit soon too, and didn't want to be left holding the bag. And so a lot of groups had people quit kind of in advance, and then they hit 5-year window, and then people either went part-time or retired or also quit. And, none of these groups really go away, right? So it's important to realize that these groups don't disappear overnight just because things are kind of a disaster. They just downsize so far. They just, gotten rid of some contracts, use some more locum stuff. Sometimes there have been groups I think that have truly imploded, and then they've just taken those warm bodies and moved them elsewhere to help kind of cover the holes in other groups. And so there's been a lot of stuff like that. So we have seen a lot of really old, stable practices become old and not very stable, and in many cases smaller than they were before. And you have, the actual companies themselves. And so the big news last year was that RP refinanced its incredibly large debt burden. So they were, billions of dollars in debt. They had zero chance of actually paying off those loans. I don't think they ever intended to. The goal was always to refinance them. And what they did was they called it a comprehensive set of financial transactions, I think was the quote they used for it. But essentially, they raised more money from NEA, which is their big kind of venture fund that funded the company in the first place, and then used that extra money coming in to pay off part of their debt so they didn't look quite so unhealthy, which is fine. Rescue funding is a real thing. And then they basically told the people who were debt holders, the bond holders, that if they didn't refinance, they would basically get nothing. The company wasn't going to be worth, I think, enough to inherit in any meaningful way. And so they got everyone to refinance. And so that's called a selective default by the credit agencies. So it's kind of like a bankruptcy without going through Chapter 11. And so the Moody's and S&P don't think that the people who lent them money got the full amount. They think they took a haircut in the principal and extended their terms. And so what they did was this weird thing where there's like a ladder of debt that you get where when you go bankrupt, certain debt gets paid before other debt. And so basically everyone who held a current amount of debt got their debt upgraded to the next best level. So they get paid first next time this happens, ideally.
Okay.
And so that's basically what they did. It worked out. They also did a clever thing where all the interest in the bonds that they would have to pay every year, they did what's called payment in kind. So instead of you paying the interest every year, you just get a bigger bond. So normally these bonds are sold with what's called a par rate, which is like a $100 bond, and a coupon rate, which is like an interest rate of like 5%. So instead of you getting $5 every year and $100 at the end of the term, every year it's $105, $110. They're just adding it on to their principal. So RP will be more in debt in the end after all this than they are going into it. But the idea is, cost of capital is very high right now. And so it's hard for companies to borrow money. And so they successfully managed to navigate that very scary time for them. And so they have till, I think, 2028 to do this again.
It's just like, what is the end game here? Are they just going to do the exact same thing in 2028 and then keep just adding garbage in?
That's quite possible. I mean, the reality is, right, this is capitalism. If people want to put money into it, they can put money into it. Now, we do have people who did go bankrupt last year. So this is actually worth mentioning too. So Envision, which is the biggest physician staffing company in the country, Chapter 11 themselves, they went bankrupt. And so did Acumen, which is a big imaging center chain. And they both went bankrupt. And so in both those cases, nobody wanted to put more investment in. No one wanted to put more equity in. And so now the debt holders own those companies. So the creditors who gave money to those companies own it. So for Acumen, for example, a company called Stonepeak was their biggest bondholder. And Stonepeak, I think, put in about $600 million to own it. So basically, they had so much debt. They had, I think, $470 million of debt. So they had to pay off the other debt holders, basically. But by doing that, now they own it. And so, and the thing about Envision and Acumen, for example, is that when you are servicing all this debt all the time, it's a big drain on your cash flow. You got to pay the interest rates. That's all gone now, right? So they can emerge from that process healthier than they were beforehand. The downside is that, for example, KKR, which owned Envision, lost, I think, $3.2 billion of their own money in that process. So obviously, if you own the company, you don't want to go bankrupt because you probably will own it afterwards. But if you're the person who lent them money, if the company is worth something, then you can own it afterwards and the company emerges debt-free and healthier than ever, and you can start from scratch again. So I think some people look at these situations and look at kind of how unreasonable it all seems at face value, and are like, this stuff should just blow up. Does it really make sense to look for like these high growth opportunities in a service industry where we are paid for widgets that we produce? Is that really the best way to run a healthcare related business? Which is a very valid question. And the reality is, even if it's not a good way, it's already happened and they don't just go away overnight. So all the consolidation that's happened doesn't revert. Even when these things happen, it is not necessarily entirely a one-way street, but it is unfortunately kind of the way things are. And so it has been an interesting time in that field to see it, both as it kind of struggles on the ground, but the reality of financing in business is kind of removed, frankly, from the actual practice of medicine, which is a completely different thing. As we all know, people who work in healthcare, that people in the back office don't really do what we do.
Man, yeah, that was a lot to chew on there.
Sorry, that is a lot. That is a lot.
No, I mean, my brain is like exploding at the numbers here. Honestly, it's just insane. So do you see groups like RP, etc., they're still bringing on practices, or have they kind of cut down on that?
No, I think the acquisition spree is essentially over. I think the cost of capital is just too expensive to borrow money to buy things right now, especially given the uncertainty in the field in general. But I'm also not even sure if you were a new company who had capital that you'd be like, yeah, I want to buy a group for a 5-year window and just hope that people love me so much they're not going to quit when 5 years is up, that may not be a great long-term investment, even if it seems like it is. So what we've seen instead is that most of their growth has been from stipend support, right? So they go to the hospitals and say, you got to pay for call, you got to pay for overnights, which is honestly what everyone's doing now. So again, nothing wrong with any of that. It's just that's one way to grow revenues is to just get more money for the work you're already doing. Totally reasonable. Again, supply and demand. Here we all are. Everything they've gone is taking contracts. So not taking groups, but taking contracts. So if there's a good contract, they can go in and steal from another group. They can do that. And a group, if it's small, might implode if that's their main work. And they can hope to kind of pick up the pieces and get some rads to join after the fact to kind of keep working where they're already working after their group has imploded. That happened in Indiana. That happened in a couple of different places where they have taken over a contract. They probably didn't actually have the manpower to take, but basically it was a gamble to do that. And they basically staffed with locums and random people because I think in most cases they haven't gotten enough local rads to stay on to do it. But they're much more interested, I think, now in growing the business through negotiation and leverage and taking the work and then trying to find the bodies for it than they are buying groups at a premium outright. That model works really well in the 0% interest rate environment that they grew up in, 10 years ago. That does not work now. It is very expensive to borrow money like that. And paying a multiple of 8, 9, 10 annual revenues to do that is not feasible, I think, in the current market.
Man, yeah. I mean, what do you think their exit strategy is? Like, do you think that they're going to eventually be bought by a bigger fish like UHC, or are they just going to keep owning radiology professional services without any exit strategy?
So I had always heard kind of secondhand-ish that they wanted to sell, that they tried to sell, including to United, and that nobody was willing to buy it at the prices that they were willing to sell it at. I think at this point now, they are large enough that it would be hard to find a buyer, frankly. They are quite large. People who could buy it are people like United. But honestly, even the vertical integration payer stuff with, these payers and pharmacy benefit managers, all these things combined, that is now in the targets of a lot of different people, including legislators. I'm not sure if you were a United type person, you'd be like, yeah, this is a safe thing to go after. Probably not. I think probably not. So I do think exit wise, that's a good question. My suspicion, which is mostly unfounded, so don't take it seriously, is that I think they've been going around talking about the tech stack a fair bit. I think their investments in AI, I think they have a super secret PACs they're working on, stuff like that. And my guess is their pitch to investors is that they're going to leverage their workforce to implement their magical IT stuff, and that's going to take them to infinity. And that's where the money's going to come from. And that, because everyone's going to be so comically efficient with AI, that because they have the contracts and they have enough warm bodies, that they are uniquely positioned to make the magic happen. I think that's the only rational bubble they could probably try to approach and be inside of. Right now, we are very much in the hype cycle of AI for obvious reasons. We think we've all seen it. And so I think when you're trying to get, investors on board, that pivot, I think, is the idea, is to pivot from services to technology. And they certainly apparently have invested lots of money in that stuff. If the question is that working or not, I have no idea, right? It's all very super secret. Do I really think RP has a huge moat in AI? I very, very much doubt it.
It's very nebulous.
It's nebulous. Also, the problem is, too, is that it's not clear that this is not more of a utility than software as a service, right? So the difference between like the power company and Google are very different things. So is this like the internet, like fiber, or is this going to be like the end product you pay a licensing fee for? I don't think it's immediately clear that spending much money right now in the early stages gets you a better product and a huge moat people cannot, penetrate later on. I think we keep seeing these things that leapfrogged every 2.5 months in the kind of greater consumer AI sphere, such that I'm not convinced anyone who's been at this earlier actually has a long-term tactical strategic advantage in this. I just don't see why that would be the case. And so I kind of doubt it. If there is some really cool stuff coming soon, will they implement it faster than everybody else? Maybe by a little bit, because they're into it, right? And they're a big practice and they have the ability. Obviously having a bunch of 10-person groups adopting the newest tools is not going to happen overnight, right? That's very hard.
Is it going to matter?
But exactly, is a half a year or a year, even 2 years, does that give you some kind of magical, durable advantage that lets you take over everything and become? I doubt it. I really do doubt it.
With the speed of the how fast stuff like advances in the hospital, and like the fact that we're still like, I feel like at some places I still like take out the cartridge, blow on it, and put it back. Like, how are you gonna get that to like even at some gigantic group like RP, how are they going to implement that?
I just don't understand what advantage that's going to give you, what durable advantage it's going to give you.
I guess the idea is that, if people are able to make more money, there might be a golden age, right? There may be a golden age again where we are all profoundly more efficient because of AI. Before reimbursement gets knocked down to account for that, where people may make a lot of money in radiology again, it is feasible. I wouldn't even predict it. I'm just saying it's possible.
Nice.
Is the idea that because they have a big workforce and they can do that, they will capitalize on that, and then they will use that money to kind of invest and double down and make this the best products to do this that no one else will be able to compete because they're going to have the best ones. The reality is that, enterprise software purchasing is arduous and complicated and prone to comical bureaucracy, right? It's like Dilbert. And so if people don't like you, which I think is probably a fair statement in general, what are the odds that they're going to want to use your product if it's tied to you that they don't like, unless it is truly astronomically better, not just a little bit better, but like order of magnitude better? Do I think, again, that they have monopoly on that? I don't see how it's possible that they would. I really don't. I don't. But I think that's the exit strategy in part is to pivot to that, because software scales and people don't.
Yeah.
And if you're looking for massive, massive growth, you can't massively grow radiologists. It doesn't really work that way. But you can potentially leverage us in massive ways if you have amazing technology. I think that has to be the play. I'm not convinced it's a good play, but I think given the money they've raised and the money they've spending, what else could they possibly do?
Well, we'll see. We'll record another episode in 2028 when all of this comes to a head.
I love being wrong too. It'll be great, because I think people should know that just because I'm like, there's a certain amount of unavoidable narcissism about writing online, like being a person who's going to be willing to have opinions on the internet is dangerous.
Podcast.
Right. It's very, very challenging. And so I don't think anyone should pretend that I think that my predictions are uniquely helpful. They're not. Like, I may be more informed than the average person because I have a weird hobby, but it's not as though I have to be right about anything. I could easily be wrong about everything. I think I'm probably not wrong all the time, but if we come back in 2028, I'll be wrong a lot, I'm sure.
No, it's going to be cool because by then we'll be able to record this podcast, while we're simultaneously interpreting 30 exams.
Yeah.
That's right.
On the RP system.
Yeah.
On the RP.
We'll be doing it. We'll actually just be thinking while we're dictating, and then it will create an AI avatar of us talking like we're all friends again. And we'll all be like in our closets, we're at the Super Bowl. We can be doing anything.
Okay, so you brought up some awesome points, and I have a friend who's like a total Elon stan, so he wanted me to ask you this question. Elon calls you and says, Department of Government Efficiency, is it Doge? I don't know, Doge, I don't know how to say it.
I think it's Doge.
Wants to make CMS as efficient as possible. What should I do in terms of imaging? Should we as RADs be embracing the strong trend of increasing imaging volumes and spending our energy adapting to the new reality? Or should we be fighting it?
So I think imaging volumes are kind of impossible to rein in. I think at this point now, it would require pretty seismic change to how healthcare is practiced in every domain to actually turn imaging off. People expect it, they want it. Our medical legal climate almost basically demands it, essentially, and especially in high acuity settings. I think it's just very hard to stop doing it. I think the idea is that if we have better tools, we can better account for that growth over time, as opposed to right now where we are behind the curve, right? We are all now solving the problem of more imaging by just working way harder.
Yeah.
And how much more juice can you squeeze out of this lemon? I think very little more juice is left. There's definitely some software you can do to help, leverage folks who have some extra bandwidth, who want to take a, temporary tele job to, on some weekends to make some extra money. But like, can that handle the relentless growth every year? No, that cannot. But if we did have better tools, if we have, better dictation, better packs, better AI, magical stuff, let's put AI in a big black box of magic, fine. But all that stuff, that to me is probably more doable to handle the volume thing. I think paying less for it is not going to help until people are able to do way more of it. So I think the solution cannot be from that kind of top-down central planning. We're going to puppet string, orchestrate a decrease in nationwide imaging volume. That does not seem plausible to me. I think what you can do is reduce costs by reducing some of the complexity and frankly bullshit that everyone deals with when it comes to healthcare reimbursement. So for example, like site neutral payments. Why do you get paid more money when you're in a hospital for outpatient work? That's stupid, right? We can all, I think everyone who's obviously, if you work in academia, I apologize, but the reality is it's stupid. People do not get better quality care at the hospital for people who are outpatients. They shouldn't be in the hospital for anything, period. That kind of stuff. There's, other issues for the various, value things that came with macro, the MIPS measures, which are also all kind of nonsense. These ideas, we all want high quality care. I want high quality care. You want high quality care. There's no reason to assume that some random measure we all report on for a year is actually making the quality better, right? I can say everyone needs IVC filter removal in every CT belly I read, and maybe that is quality care this year. Maybe it's not next year. The idea of tying payments to these things that require a lot of kind of bureaucratic buy-in and extra cost to be in compliance with drives consolidation, and consolidation healthcare increases prices. We've seen it now with big healthcare networks, the hospitals, the payers. When things get big, they get more expensive. They're not getting more efficient with scale. They're just using that to extract value for themselves. And so we need to make it possible to be small again, to be agile, and to not to be part of some big thing. And that's, if I were in Doge, what I'd be focusing on is reducing all the friction to just practicing real healthcare by real humans for real humans, and not for these kind of nebulous, kind of awful, grinding bureaucracies that are just designed to extract money through friction.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like it's the consolidation, it just has not helped. And I don't know if it's on like Elon's radar or anything. I feel like people tweet at him about it, but who knows if he'll actually do something. But who knows? We're like 3 weeks into this administration, so we'll see, right? We'll see.
He is certainly running amok in the government right now. There's no denying that he is taking a sledgehammer. They're using the move fast and break things, method of tech innovation, things that have been untouched for like 60 years. So we'll see how that goes.
It's an interesting time to be an American, that's for sure. Do you think that with all the explosive growth of tele, that any diagnostic radiologists will physically be in hospitals 5 years from now?
I think that's a very good question. I think the answer is yes. What I am thinking is going to happen is we might see kind of a dual class system where certain markets are able to have radiologists on site who are doing high touch stuff and doing fluoro and talking to doctors and doing the kind of classic radiologist stuff. And places that cannot retain and recruit people to be there may end up with an IR-DR split, right? Where you have procedures covered by people who are on site, either maybe directly employed by the hospital or in their own practice, and then people who are doing DR are somewhere far away. Is that good or bad? I think for long-term radiologist stability, probably bad, right? I think whenever you're out of sight, out of mind, you become a commodity even more than before. Right now, turnaround times are basically the only thing people measure because they're measurable, but the quality is highly variable across the board. And so I get worried about the quality of radiology going forward in that world. But the reality is someone has to do that work. And if people aren't willing to do it on site, then it's going to have to be remote. And so I do think we're going to see some more places that are going to have remote coverage. And you're going to be, who's going to do GI fluoro? IR? I mean, gosh. They're going to hire a PA to do GI fluoro. I mean, we're going to have some rules changed, though, for Medicare in terms of how they cover staffing for these things. Because right now, the whole kind of easy procedure, quick procedure, kind of, your LPs and your GI fluoro things require someone to be there. It's historically has been DR. It's probably moving more into the weird kind of PA-NP land. We have the weird middle ground RA situation where it's like they can't do anything yet. Maybe they can one day. Is that the solution? I don't know. Who supervises you if you're a mid-level by yourself in a hospital doing LPs once a week? I mean, it's a lot of question marks, I think. None of it's going to be smooth. What I think is going to happen is that when this happens to some safety net rural hospital somewhere where they are left totally out of the thing and they cannot get coverage and it's a complete disaster, the hospital is not wealthy and can't easily afford locums, and some place goes bankrupt because their finances are not good in general, and someone's going to be able to tie it on, they couldn't even get radiology services. People are waiting 2 weeks for an MRI. Like, if that happens, there's going to be a massive news story and the whole field's going to look so scummy, right? We all didn't want to go there and take care of people. We wanted to be in our pajamas, reading from home, making our, top line physician revenue. It's not going to look good when that happens. I think I love my job. I love all of our jobs. That's not going to look good when that happens. And it's probably going to happen if I had to guess. I don't know when, but it seems almost unavoidable given how things are going.
They're going to find us. Yeah. And then
I'm worried.
Nobody cares about doctors. Nobody feels bad for doctors and how much money we make. Yeah. We're always on the chopping board, right?
It's like with PSLF happened, the student loan thing, whereas when the student loans got forgiven and the first week it happened, they're like, we found a brain surgeon. got loans forgiven, makes $1 million a year. And it's like, and like this person, they didn't break any rules, but like, does the average reader enjoy that narrative? We're like, I'm being taxed to help someone who makes 7 figures get their loans forgiven. It's not a good narrative always. And that program is very popular. It helps lots of people. So it's a different story. We don't have that kind of appearance to the everyday person.
Most people don't even know we're doctors. It's great.
Correct.
Is it great? I don't know. Sometimes it's great.
Yeah, my group has picked up several of these remote-only contracts. And interestingly, a few of them have been groups that have either been unhappy with RP groups, or RP groups have dropped them. And so we have picked those contracts up. And the way we have done it has been offering, it's a non-exclusive contract, and we're doing remote-only, diagnostic-only. And it's a challenge. We're still trying to figure out with one of them what we're going to do with IR. If, we have hired a couple of the original interventional radiologists. We're going to be going on site for some of the days, but I think some of it is just going to have to be done by locums. And some some of the contracts haven't expressed a need for it at all. Like, we just need radiology coverage, and they are some of our happiest contracts. Like, these people, they're used to having a very long list that it takes a long time to get individual studies read, and we clean our list daily, and they've been very happy.
Which is kind of rare these days. You clean your list daily. There's never anything left.
Amazing.
Well, yeah. So some small private practice groups are benefiting from the RP implosion. That's really great.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, right, is that whenever someone's unhappy, it's an opportunity. And usually opportunities also have risks. Like, you could say, I'm going to do this contract, and they're like, we need IR coverage. Can you help us? And you're like, oh, that's a whole different story. And maybe you can offer it because it's an in-state hospital, but what happens if you're covering an out-of-state hospital and credentialing and licensing? And I think it's going to work a lot of times, right? I don't think it's always not going to work. The question is, when it doesn't work, how much of a problem does this really become long-term? If the hospitals were unhappy with RP, for example, and they're willing to pay top dollar to get better quality services, then they're happy and you're happy and everyone's happy. What happens when that hospital is not able or willing to pay top dollar and no one wants that work? I think that is a harder question. Or what happens when they really do need coverage and they're paying for locums, and let's say they can't even get locums? I mean, is locums really the future of the field? We want to have non-guaranteed DR contracts, and then all the high touch patient care is done by mercenaries. Is that really stable? It's probably not very stable.
You mentioned earlier, we were talking about hospital subsidies. A lot of small, medium-sized groups really want to engage their hospital to talk about subsidies. What has been your personal experience with ARA and going about asking for compensation to be competitive, but without ruffling too many feathers?
I think the reality is that it's basically table stakes now for DR work to have it for after-hours coverage. I think the idea of being able to pay a market rate for evening and overnight work is basically impossible with just RVU reimbursement, especially given that many bigger hospitals have, charity care and, bad debt that you're not getting paid for. And so if your bad debt is like, 20, 24%, you're getting paid for only, 3/4 of the work you do, that you can't pay for a 2 a.m. read that way. It just doesn't work. It just doesn't pay the bills. And so I think they have to be aware of that. I think what I've seen is that more and more hospitals now are on board with that reality. I think they now kind of know. And what happens is when they don't know or they kind of fight it, is then the group quits or doesn't do it. Like, RP drops those contracts. And then what ends up happening is that they have to do it anyway, right? So it's, someone's get paid more for that work. The question is, does the group that hospital likes, hopefully, get that money? Or does that group implode or quit and the hospital pays the next group that money? Because no one's going to take that work without the money. It's not going to happen with the current market. And so I think more hospitals are aware of this. I think, 3 years ago, it was not common. Now it's increasingly ubiquitous. I think everyone essentially needs to have them to a large extent to get the work done. I do worry about the kind of smaller groups that feel like they could be replaced easily by a hospital. They may not have the leverage they want to have, but ultimately, I'm not sure how you can recruit and retain in most markets without it, unless you have really amazing contracts and kind of chill, low call, low burden hospitals where it's kind of part of a larger thing. But if you're, busy on call, it's very tough.
Yeah, for
to
sure.
afford 7 on 14 off. I mean, someone's, to pay a full FTE salary for a third of the work, it's got to come from somewhere.
Another reason why the public will hate us is because they will realize there's people that are working a third of the year for that salary. they're not going to understand that night work is just something else, and just destroys your life in other ways. Do you think it's like better for a group to try and get a guaranteed RVU for given studies, or to do like a flat rate stipend?
I think it makes probably more sense in most situations to go after a kind of hourly or flat rate stipend, essentially a radiology service fee, essentially. So in order for someone to be working during these hours, you have to do kind of like you do for IR call, right? You get paid for pager call. You don't get call, or if you do get call, it's just to have access to the IR doc requires money. I think you need to have a service fee to pay for the extra stuff. It also makes sense, I think, in some situations to have various service obligations tied into contract where, let's say, tumor boards are paid per hour or per tumor board. They may be capped at how many they can add on per, how many cases they can do per conference, how many conferences they can do per month, that kind of stuff. It does make sense to, I think, in this world, acknowledge that the things we used to do for free to get the contract now really require support. So we used to do all these things, 10 years ago to be desirable to the hospital, to get the contract, be on site all the time, do LPs and, do GI fluoro on weekends, like, that kind of stuff. All these things that maybe were not super high yield all the time, tumor boards, et cetera. And most of these things now, they require time, and time is now money, even more than it was before. And so it makes sense to kind of figure out what makes sense for your group. But I think a guaranteed RVU is a little bit tougher to do the math on. It's more variable and probably a little bit easier to just put it as a kind of subscription service in many ways.
Yeah, I like that idea. Kind of, we're going to have multiple tiers of radiology service. You get like the white glove service, right, on one end, and then just like the bare bones on the other end. And you choose from the concierge list what you want to do. I think you're right. That might be the future, but we'll find out in 2028. I'd like to shift gears now and talk a little bit about independent radiology, your job board. Tell me a little bit about the rollout of that and how it's been received.
Yeah. So, back about a year ago, actually, a reader had sent me a job posting actually on the ACR job board that was an RP job posting for RP Matrix, which is their teleradiology arm. And the ACR has a practice setting field in their job postings. And it said independent private practice, which is not an accurate statement. It wasn't even an RP group. Yeah. It was actually the RP national office job. So it wasn't, you couldn't even pretend it was a physician group. And I was just like, that is kind of infuriating, right? There's like 2,800 job postings on the ACR. It's a huge website. It's hard to filter, hard to use. And it's flooded by all these practices that are not independent. And that's fine. They are allowed to exist, obviously. But if you are a small independent practice, how could you possibly get through that noise if that was happening? And so that's what got me to want to do independent radiology. Now, to the ACR's credit, they actually, after I kind of blasted them on the internet for having that be possible, they changed everything on the website in a variety of ways to address that problem. By that point, I was already kind of angry enough to just do it. And so I made independent radiology, and the idea, it's a job board just for physician-owned private practices. So if you are a radiologist who wants to join one, this is where you can find them. There's no private equity, there's no hospital employment, there's no even academia. It's just doctor-owned practices. That is what I was trying to kind of help and support and promote. I think private practice is important. It's not always easy. Not everyone has to work in one. That's totally fine. But I did want it to survive and want it to thrive. And so I made this website just for those practices. And so it's very simple. It's very straightforward. You can filter for only a handful of things like specialty, partnership, employee or contractor status, what state you're in. It's like 100+ groups in it. And that was the idea. It was, not just looking for a job, but like really trying to promote careers. So each group has one job posting. Whether you're hiring for 20 jobs or one job, the smallest group or the biggest group with the same amount of footprint on the site, because I want people to stop thinking about radiology so much as, what's the best job out there for me? And really, where can I be part of something bigger and really have that mentality to be part of a real group, part of a team with other doctors doing the job together. And so that's why I created it. And so I look at every single thing myself. So every edit is edited by me. I edit every single listing myself.
Wow.
If I think it's confusing, I will respond back and be like, I'm confused. You need to fix this.
Yeah.
And we will go through it together until it makes sense to me. So I don't think it's misleading. They have to tone down the adjectives. It can't be too over the top. Like I'm not going to let them say. So it really is like super high touch and very inefficient. But I wanted it to be.
It's your baby.
That. It's my baby. it's like, I didn't want it to be like people just being like, this is the best job in the world. You should like, and just not, it's like, that's not helpful. Right. And so it is comically inefficient.
Well, have you been approached by people who use the job board that like they want more information about price transparency or pay transparency on the board? And then what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I have had a few people ask about that. And the answer is that there are some states that have rules for it. Like California, for example, you have to post it. And so those groups all have it posted.
Yeah.
I have encouraged groups to be more transparent in general, especially with like workup lengths, because that is pretty easy to measure. You know, the problem with price in terms of salary is that it does vary a lot. In many practices now, if you take call or you don't take call, if you want to have more vacation, less vacation, it's pretty variable. And so when people do post their salary, they often have a range, in which case it ends up being like kind of comically large and then not
it's like
very helpful.
100,000 to like 1.5 million. Yeah. And you're like, okay, what am I going to do with that? Right.
So it is tough. You know, my goal is that I want things to be more transparent in general. I do think it's more challenging than I would have thought to encourage that. My suspicion is that over time, I'll be able to show people which postings are more effective and therefore kind of encourage, like, I know you're scared to share your secret sauce to your practice, but ultimately you're going to be better off just putting it out there. Everyone's always saying like, you know, top tier revenues or top quintile. And like, I don't know what any of that means.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what top quintile salary is for Georgia. I have no idea what that is. I have no clue.
Right.
And so it is a little bit frustrating, but I have really almost demanded at least partnership links beyond there, essentially. And then I have been a little bit more open-minded about the salary itself, but it is important. And I think for most of the employee jobs, it's on there. I think the partnership stuff, people are a bit more hesitant to share that salary is, which I do kind of get, especially if it's very high. You don't necessarily want the entire world to know you're making 7 figures, but maybe you do.
Maybe you do in this job market. Okay, have you gotten like any requests from non-independent radiologists to put a job post on there? And then how fun has it been to just like slap those down?
So many.
Really?
Oh, wow. Yeah. No, people have asked for academia or people who've been a part of other practices where they're part of like multiple specialties and you're like, you know, we're employees, but we're really involved in the business side of it. So we kind of have, it's kind of a hybrid model. And it's like, that's not really a thing. So what I always tell them is that this is not a knock on your practice, which may be wonderful. But the whole point, it has to have a mission, right? If I just say your version of being an employee sounds fantastic, then where do I draw the line between anything else? And so I just tell them all, like, I can't, same thing for tele companies. People were like, I'm a doctor-owned tele company, okay? So it's like you, as an individual doctor, own this company. Everyone who works for you is a contractor, and they're not partners. Remote. It's like, that's not denigrating that position or those jobs or anyone who takes them, but I don't need to support that in this. I'm trying to help people who are on the boots on the ground jobs get remote workers and on-site workers. I don't need to then promote the contractor mills who are doing that. I'm sure some of them are owned by doctors, and doctors are doing quite well for themselves, but that's not the same thing as being a physician to own a private practice in the typical sense. So I just tell them all no.
We all love our own practice model and want to see it survive if we believe in it. And you love yours and you want to see it survive. And I respect that. I love the job board. I check it all the time. I think it's super cool to see what practices are doing. Is there anything that's like on the horizon for the job board that we should know about as users?
So nothing yet. It's still, I think, pretty new. So I launched it on August 14th. So it's actually only been around for less than half a year. It grew pretty fast to being 100 plus groups. There'll be some more groups joining. There are people still signing up for it. You know, we'll see after, over time if it continues to be as successful. I mean, I've been really heartened by the response from both groups and from Raz. I mean, I've gotten, countless people supporting it, giving me kudos, which I really appreciate. And some groups have been ecstatic. They've been, we've had more success with this in just 2 months than we've had with ACR for years. I do think it probably did strike a nerve or kind of the market at the right time to help deal with this kind of time. So I'm really happy about it. To do more in terms of kind of building it up in a more robust tech way would be a substantial change to how I built it, because I am not a developer. It was done mostly by myself, and I am just a random dude. It may change over time. Frankly, part of me wants to expand it to doing all of healthcare, frankly, because I do think that in other fields, it's the same problem. It's not just radiology that has to deal with this. And that would require a lot more effort, so I probably won't do it. But somebody probably should do it for everybody else, because it really is, I think, it's important.
It's like kind of nice because it's like low tech, like I don't have to click through 18 things like the ACR job board. Oh, I wanted to ask you, has like ACR got in touch with you and been like, bro, what are you doing? Or have they not talked to you at all?
No, they did. Someone reached out. I won't say who it was. And they were very nice. And they said, thank you for bringing these issues to light. We are really using this as kind of a call to action to redo our site and kind of fix the issues because they're real issues. So they were they were totally reasonable about it. And I think what happened was the ACR actually board is run by like one person and like most like a third party company, I guess, and that one person. So I don't think it actually, it was very useful to a lot of people. It didn't get a lot of TLC, I think, over the years to deal with what radiology has become. I think, 10 years ago, I'm sure it was great. It just didn't grow in a usable way. So they were actually at least that one person was very nice.
He's like, thanks, stop picking on me. Yeah, I'm in charge of this and I'm the only one. No, it's really cool that you built this and that you are so involved in it still. And it's not like something you're trying to just like make a bunch of money off doctors for. And it's like a service to us. It really is. It's super fantastic. Tons of my friends are talking about it. It's like, keep it up. It's awesome. How does it feel to be like the most famous radiologist in America right now?
Oh, I don't think that's true. It's a terrifying thought, Allie.
It's so true. I mean, at least in our generation, like everybody knows about you. Everybody reads your blog posts. You have like so much influence on just everything we talk about too. Do you get recognized like at the supermarket yet?
No, I don't. I mean, I will say, I think it has more to do with the fact that what I do is so rare than just like how good I am at doing it. For a long time, anyone who's going to do meaningful writing or lobbying or anything was doing it based on papers, publishing a paper in some journal in academia. Chiropractic had nothing to say about anything at all. And then our generation did social media, right? We have Facebook and Twitter, and people are willing to have hot takes, but no one wants to have anything that has a real name on it and that has a half-life longer than 5 minutes. And so the reality is, if you look at how many people are willing to use their real name and write an essay about some niche topic in radiology, the answer is one person. I think it's me, and I'm not sure anyone else is doing it.
Yeah.
And the reality is, I probably should not be the only voice in radiology doing this. Like, there's Lion Monkey, is also a good one, but like, there are very few people who do this. And it's not that I think I have super fascinating insights into the world of radiology. I'm willing to learn out loud. That's what I've always done ever since I started writing online 15 years ago. Was I had a question, I wanted to answer it, I got the answer, and I wrote it down. And that's what I've been doing for a long time. And I think we'd all be better served if more people did that. If you were to add up people's LinkedIn posts and Facebook posts, we would probably get some useful information out there if you get rid of most of the BS. But the fact that half of it's like salesman stuff and half of it's anonymous, it becomes very hard to take it all seriously. So I think that's why it's there. It's because this is a very small niche and I am the only person doing it that way. But I don't know. Yes. It's weird.
You're niche famous. It's amazing. It's a great way to be. I mean, we talked about like it's our generation of people who are interested in this. Let's talk about the olds real fast. Do you feel like a lot of current group leadership is stuck in their old ways per se? And that's kind of one of the reasons that a lot of these private practice groups are having trouble surviving?
I think that's probably part of it, at least in some situations. Yeah. I think it's not necessarily even anyone's fault. It's that, it's happened like Intel, right? Like the people make computer processors, like
the chip makers.
They had the dominant chip for a long time, and they were competing with AMD to make the best chip, and they were fighting all the time, and they completely missed mobile, right? So ARM makes all the chips for your cell phone, and now for MacBook Pros are made by ARM via a custom process. But regardless, the point is it's not Intel anymore. Yeah, it's like you could be the dominant player in your area, be competing with other groups for business in your area, and just miss the existential threat coming behind, whether that's private equity or AI or something. It's just the nature of success is that it breeds the next failure. It's the thing that is almost unavoidable in many cases. So I don't think it's anyone's fault. But yeah, I think for a long time, if your MO was that I need to grow, big to be safe, if there's a work available, I will take the work and I will hire up to meet that work. And that worked for a very, very long time. And tell people, hey, by the way, you can't do that. You cannot hire up to meet work anymore. You got to get bodies first and then find work. That is a complete reversal. And that is, I think, very challenging. And I think that is not anyone's fault, but it is a reality that I do think there are some situations where that has been the case, where it's been hard to adapt to the new environment. I think it's also true for academia and other situations too, where I think the market has not fully appreciated that. And part of it's that, healthcare is not a free market. We don't
No.
all control how we get paid and how we do our business. And so where, most consumer goods can really adapt to changing conditions very quickly, we can't adapt that fast. It requires some pain. And so I think we're in the middle of that.
Oh man. Well, it's kind of a tough place to end. Anything else you want our listenership to know about kind of what do you think radiology is going to be like 5 years from now, per se?
So instead of saying what's going to happen in 5 years, because I'll be wrong and then I'll be sad, what I would say is that what we should all be doing more, instead of predicting what's going to happen, is making sure that we are going to be successful in as many situations as could happen, right? So I think we should all be aware that the world is changing, that uncertainty is an unavoidable part of life. And so if your plan for your life, for your career, relies on a very narrow set of things to occur to be successful, it's probably a bad plan. So maybe have a better plan and be more flexible. And that might mean saving more money. That might mean, let's say, wanting to have an on-site component to your job, knowing that, if we do have magical AI tools in the future, the first person to be cut is the random dude cranking at 2 p.m. on an out-day weekend reading MRIs. That guy's not helpful anymore, right? In that world, even though right now they're making bank. So I think there are situations where it makes sense to acknowledge the uncertainty of it, and you can do that in different ways. But that is what I would leave people with. I think the future is unknown. I certainly don't know it. So it does make sense to try to live your life in a way that you will increase the surface area of your success, as opposed to sow the seeds of your own demise. I think that is what I would leave with that. Super positive note. Everyone go work for independent. No, kidding.
Yes. I love it. Ben, thanks so much for coming on the show. I love talking to you. You're just so smart and insightful, and you take the time to care about this stuff. And thanks for kind of breaking it down into like very chewable pieces for our audience. And for me, who basically sometimes I feel like you have to explain things to me like a toddler before I understand them. But yes, I kind of get it now. Just another plug for Independent Radiology, your job board. Take a look at it if you haven't already. It's fantastic and it's interesting. And then as well as your blog, benwhite.com. Ben, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and follow, rate the show 5 stars, and share with a friend. If you have any questions or comments, direct message us at _BackTable on Instagram, LinkedIn, X, TikTok, or Blue Sky. BackTable is produced and hosted by myself, Aaron Fritz, and co-hosts
Chris Beck, Sabine Dawn,
Michael Barraza,
And Ali Baheti.
Our production team is led by Kieran Gannon,
Aaron Bowles,
Gabe D'Agrazio,
and Josh Spencer. Design and digital marketing led by Brian Schmitz.
Social media and PR by Ann Dang, Manisha Naganathanahali,
and Manbir Singh Sandhu.
Administrative support provided by Judy Dela Cruz.
Thanks again. See you next time.